Connie Sokol, your host. And once again, it is such a delight to talk with Latter-day Saint authors. And today we have another great one. We are so delighted to have Heather B. Moore with us today. Hi, Heather.
Hi, thanks for having me, Connie.
Oh, it's such a joy. And I have been able to interview her before. And we were just saying, it feels like it was just yesterday. And it is just delightful to see your writing career morph and develop, just keep blooming and blossoming. And as you are being a mom and as you're doing things in the church, it's all in the mix. And that's what I love. And we're going to talk about that today, of navigating this intersection between faith and creativity and professional skill. How do you do this on the daily, and giving tips and tools for those out there who are especially wanting to be writers. So let me give you the official bio, and then I want to share a couple of fun things of her and I, the experiences that we've shared together. But she is Heather B. Moore, and she is a USA Today bestselling author of more than 70 publications. Yes, you heard that right. And she also has made meals and done laundry. I just want to impress the amazingness of that. Her historical novels and thrillers are written under the pen name H.B. Moore, so if you've seen that, but she also writes women's fiction, romance, and inspirational nonfiction under Heather B. Moore. And I love the point she makes. She's like, this is super confusing, so my kids just call me mom, which I think is wisdom. The beautiful fact that I think is so interesting, she also attended Cairo American College in Egypt and the Anglican School of Jerusalem in Israel, and earned a Bachelor of Science degree from Brigham Young University in Utah, which is just incredible that she's done all of these things. And you can see in her writing the weaving of all that learning coming into play. And we're going to talk about that as well today. She is also represented by Distel, Goderic, and Beret, and we are so excited to have you here today. So let's just jump right in. I have loved being a part of your life in a very, very small way. We all just sort of fangirl Heather, but at Storymakers, it's a writing conference for Latter-day Saint authors. And it's an incredible conference, 700 people, almost 1,000 people. It's just incredible. But I remember we have connected there. And then Heather taught a small writing class in the community. And I remember attending that. And even from those experiences, she helped plant that desire, not just desire, but that doability of, you can write this book that you feel impressed or compelled to write. So let's talk about what that was like for you. When did you feel that stirring in your soul to write?
First of all, I never thought I'd be a writer. I thought authors were pearls and diamonds. They lived in New York, or they lived in Los Angeles in a beautiful house on the cliff. So they had like this muse 24/7, right? And I remember one of my neighbors gave me a book just because we were always swapping books, and it was by an author in Utah. And I thought, oh, authors live in Utah? It was just silly of me to think that. And so I started reading more LDS fiction. I started reading more books by Utah authors. And I just thought, wow, this is like a whole another industry. Because when I would go to a bookstore in Utah, like Desert Book or Siegel Book, I was there to buy something to do with the scriptures, or, you know what I'm saying? So, and I was helping my grandma write her personal history, and she lived about 30 miles from me. So once a week, I'd take my little kids up there and ask questions, and I'd write them down. And then I kind of compiled this history. But while I was working on that, I just had a story idea for a woman that had grown up in the same era as my grandmother. So obviously it was inspired by kind of her life and her era during the war, World War II. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll just write like a short story. And I don't know, it was just a story that I thought I wanted to write, which I hadn't really felt compelled outside of high school or college to actually just write something like fictional. Anyway, so I started writing, and it turned into a 300-page novel. And I had no idea what to do with it. I didn't know. I was just totally naive. I didn't know plot. I didn't know character. I mean, except for what I learned maybe in English class 10 years before or 12 years before. And I live in Lehi, Utah, and the library is just a tiny, tiny library, but I was able to find a giant book called Writer's Marketplace. And in those days, you had to print off chapters and mail them with your own self-addressed stamp envelope for your rejection. And so I did that for months and months, and I was getting rejected, of course. And this is kind of when the internet was just getting going, and email was a thing, and everyone had dial-up internet if you're lucky at home. Mm. And I found a website for the League of Utah Writers, and I found out they had chapter meetings once a month in the Provo Library. And so I started going to those, and that was when my whole world really just shifted. Wow, there's people here from my same county, and they're getting published, and they're writing these novels. I ended up joining a critique group, and that's when I really learned how to write. So obviously that first book
Fabulous.
has never been published.
And there's always that one that stays in the
Right.
drawer, which thank you to everybody, right? It's
Right.
merciful. But I love that family history for the win. That's the thing
Mhm.
that catalyzed this, that was the springboard. And that because of that, you started to see yourself in that realm. And then I love the next step where you just reached out and you could instinctively feel you needed to connect with other people in order to move this forward, and in a doable way, once a week, still with children and still doing your thing as you went along. So did you decide at the beginning that you really wanted to focus on scriptural novels, or were you more like, oh, I want to do fiction, or were you just sort of like, whatever's coming, I'm going to write?
So my first book was set in World War II, and it read like a memoir as far as it covered the woman's whole life, because I just didn't know what I was doing, right? I started when she was a teenager and it went until just her whole life. And I thought everybody would like this book from 12 and up until they're 102. And so I love to read mysteries. Like Mary Higgins Clark was one of my favorite mystery writers, and I had probably read everything she'd ever written. And so I thought, well, I can't get this World War II novel published, so I'm going to write a mystery. And it was a kidnapping mystery. And just being naive and not understanding the industry at all, when I was shopping it or sending it out to publishers, this is when Elizabeth Smart was kidnapped from her home. And it was just this huge national media sensation going constantly on the news. And I thought, I wrote a kidnapping mystery. There's no way this will get published now. My mind just did not understand the industry. And that's the thing, is you can write a book, but you also have to educate yourself in the publishing industry. Of course, I could write a kidnapping mystery. And of course, there's thousands of them out there. And of course, they will sell. And so then I started writing another book. And I had finished that one, and I did submit to a publisher, and they were really sweet. And they wrote back and they said, we were 30 pages into your book, and we were like, this is awesome. We love the writing. We love everything. We love the main character, the detective. But then we realized you hadn't researched police procedures. And I'm like, no, well, of course not, because I'm not going to go talk to a cop and ask them questions. That was way too intimidating for my introverted self. And so that manuscript did nothing. So I didn't go back and research and clean up what I need to clean up. I just started writing another book. And this one, I thought, okay, I'm going to write something that no one can criticize my research. So I wrote about this Puritan community, and it's like kind of a mystery, and there's a ghost in it. So again, I'm just making a salad.
Yeah, exactly. You're just checking in ingredients and hoping it all come together.
I don't know if I call them my practice books, but I was going to critique group. I was like learning to plot, learning to characterize, learning description. The ladies would say, Heather, where are we? I don't know. Well, are they standing in the kitchen? Are they in the desert? Are they camping? And so I had to learn how to set the scene. So it's kind of like I went back to college. So these 3 books were me going back to college and learning how to write a novel. So then I started looking at the actual marketplace before I was going to write my next book. I said, okay, what does the marketplace need? What will sell in the marketplace? What are my friends, my writer friends actually writing, and who are they writing for? So then I looked at the local publishers, and that's when I decided to write a historical series with Nephi as the main character. And I remember chatting with my family about it. And my dad is a gospel scholar. And I thought, well, he knows all this stuff. Maybe he could co-write with me. And so I kind of explained what I was doing. And he was very sweet, but said, I do not write fiction. So then I thought, okay, I'm still going to write this book on Nephi, and maybe it'll be this really cool series. Like there's some other series out there, you know, in the LDS market. And so I wrote chapter 1, and I thought it was really great, you know, because I had lived in the Middle East. So I have like this whole platform, and I have credentials. And so I take it to critique group and I read it, and I'm just waiting for them to say, wow, this is like amazing. This is your genre. This is your thing. And the first lady said to me, well, you know, there's another series on Nephi's family out there, and book 3 is out, and it's this huge series. I'm like, are you, like, I had no idea. Are you serious? And it was published by Covenant, which is the same publisher I was hoping, because a bunch of my writer friends were with them. And so, you know, it was just kind of a natural thing for me. And anyway, but then she said, well, this is different. This is written from a different point of view, you know, different, starts a different place in the book. So I just thought, okay, well, I'm just going to go for it. And that was my first book that was published. And the thing is, when you start publishing in a certain genre, your publisher, especially if you're traditionally publishing, they like you to stay in that genre because you build up a readership in a market. So I ended up writing 9 novels on the Book of Mormon and a nonfiction book on women of the Book of Mormon.
which is fantastic. Sorry, I have to make a plug
Thanks.
for that. I learned so much about culture and what it's like living there and what it would have been like for them. And it's just enriched my scripture studies so much. I love these sort of touch points that you are sharing of the fire was lit and then you connected with other people and what a core gift that was. And then you realize the need for research, both in your own work for the craft, as well as in the marketplace, following those trends, being able to see what resonated for you that was genuine and realistic. These are huge pieces. And just like you said, you allowed yourself, though, the journey to unfold that, to have the learning and not feel like a failure and just keep going and realize you're just unwrapping these boxes, right? These gifts that are just unwrapping layers and layers and layers. So I do want to segue for a minute because I love that. I can't even believe you're so amazing in what you do. I mean, if you go on her blog, she is so free with how she became a USA Today bestselling author. She just absolutely details how she went through that process. And I've loved how open and free you are with your information. It's just beautiful. But I look back through this and I'm seeing how you are now, and you are so on it and so detailed in things that I hope it gives listeners hope that where they feel like, I don't know how to do research and I don't know how to do this stuff, that you allowed yourself to learn along the way. So I want to segue back because your father, who is Professor S. Kent Brown, if anybody doesn't know out there, so he says he doesn't write fiction, but you guys have co-authored the Divinity of Woman book together. But he has been an influence in your life. How has that impacted your writing? His knowledge and conversations with him and things like that. How has that influenced your writing, with especially your historical novels and your scriptural writing?
So my dad, I mean, he's written a lot too. It's all, of course, nonfiction. Most of it's doctrinal. He's the kind of person who will spend 5 years on a book because he's getting every detail right. He's getting every reference right. I think that has taught me that the research is worth it, that especially if it's historical, that the readers want it to be authentic because they want to learn. And I like to read that genre. I like to read historical fiction because I want to learn. And maybe nonfiction can be more tiring, like if I'm reading about a deep subject. So I appreciate historical fiction writers who can educate me and entertain me at the same time.
And that's the thing. Like when I'm reading your books, I'm learning so much. And I love that because I come away now when I read the actual scriptures, and I understand, there's a difference there, but when I'm reading the scriptures, I can envision things a little bit more. So let's talk about that for a second, because there is such a fine line between what is doctrinal and what is fiction, right? And I know with Gerald Lund, there was a comment somebody had made once that said, it's a really hard thing when he did the whole Work in the Glory series and people would get off the tour bus back east and they'd say, where's the Steed farm, right? And they're not a real family. So how do you navigate that line and make sure that stays in a good space?
Yeah, it is tricky, especially with my very first series on Nephi and then when they journeyed to the promised land. And of course, I think, oh, they went to, the coast of South America. Well, not everyone believes that's where they landed. So sometimes I had to take a position, and usually I tried to take the one that was the most generally well believed or the most supported through research, and not to discount someone else's research that might be breakout research. And so in my novels that are the very historical ones, like Out of Jerusalem, I would have chapter notes and I'd have an author note explaining if I deviated from a path or a chapter where I got that particular research. And so where did Nephi find his iron ore, and where do these scientists believe the iron ore was close enough to the surface of the earth for him just to dig it out, and so, because he wasn't a miner, he didn't have special machines to find it. And so those kind of things, but it was super helpful. My dad obviously was helpful in this process because I could ask him, I say, hey, I have this question. And he wouldn't give me the answer a lot of times. He would say, in this book, or this author or this scholar wrote an article or wrote a book. And so he would have me go look it up. And it really turned me into research going through that process. And it made me also appreciate those scholars that really dedicate their lives to these details that a lot of us don't ever hear about or read about. So it really was a privilege and an honor for me. And I call them, scripture nerds or scholarly people, those highbrow intellects. I take their research and then I bring it down a few levels so the rest of us can enjoy it in a more palpable way.
I love it. And put it in layman's terms that we can
Yeah.
appreciate. Well, even like the one about the women in the Book of Mormon. I mean, it was amazing to me to think about Sariah, that they wouldn't ride camels because they were just barely above a servant. And then they would walk all day, and then they would put up the big tents. And then they were the ones in charge of doing the fire and the food and everything. I'm thinking, and then she's pregnant, right? Out in the
Right.
wilderness. And I'm thinking, oh my word. And she was not a young thing. So
Yeah.
wow, it just put things in perspective. And let's talk about that for a minute, because you have a beautiful series where you have all these main people in the scriptures. Abinadi, you have Deborah, Ammon, a bunch of them, and they're fantastic. Loved Deborah, especially because we don't hear so much about her, and she is phenomenal. But how do you work that with trying to create a potential setting and potential things that the people who want fiction would appreciate? I noticed, like, even in Deborah, there was more of that at the beginning, and then there was the actual experience that was very forthright. It was pretty much right out of the scriptures. So how do you navigate that of making it
So
appealing
every
to
book's a little
people?
bit different. So you brought up Deborah, and Deborah is more of a two-part book. Like, so I felt like, okay, she was a judge in Israel. She was obviously educated. She was respected. Most importantly, she was called of God, because as a woman in Israel, like you said, they didn't even really have rights of a servant. And so she obviously was going to be called of God, and then everyone in the country, all of her people, would respect that and honor that. So I thought, okay, so what part of her life led up to this? So then really the most fictional part is the first half of the book, where we get to know her as a young woman, and she has a lot of brothers, and she's a dad. Her mother is not in the picture. And then I thought, well, her husband, and this is another thing I had talked to my dad about. So do you think she was married? Do you think she had children? How old was she? Like 25, or was she like 45? And so we talked through all those things. And obviously we're both speculating, but my dad has a much better foundation to speculate than I do. And so we both agreed that she had been married, and she had already had children, and the children were maybe young teenagers when then the Lord said, okay, now you're ready. You can take time away from raising your children to be in this judge role. And then also from the scriptures, we know that there was this huge war, and that the military commander, he wasn't exactly following the inspiration from God, but Deborah knew what was going to happen. And so she ended up having to go and be kind of the figurehead in this big battle. And so then I thought, okay, so I feel like I had like two stories I needed to join, and there would be a time jump in the year. But I didn't want to skip out on how we see Deborah grow and develop and have her testimony strengthened. And how do you have that responsibility given to you by a God that would influence the entire country? So obviously there's an outline in the scriptures, but then you have to look at the character. And that's the thing I really learned in my critique group, is what's their motivation and what's their background, and how does their character arc develop, and how do they go from being just a young girl living in a tent with their father outside of a village to now becoming a judge and spiritual leader of Israel, of her whole country.
I love it. And I think that is such a difficult thing to jump into, but it made sense as I'm reading it. I'm thinking she was this young woman who had a whole history, and she was a person. And I think that's the whole goal of doing historical fiction, that we try to see ourselves in the story and see them in that experience and see ourselves in there as well. So we have a warmer kind of connection to them. So let's switch gears for a second, because you go from scriptural novels. You are such an amazingly talented woman and writer that your mind can shift the gear. And for those that are listening, I'm sure we can appreciate that is a difficult thing for an author to do, and to do it well in more than one genre. What switched you over to romance and then to historical romance, where, you have a whole different time period, never mind contemporary. So take us through that journey. What happened with you there?
So I had been writing Book of Mormon fiction and inspirational nonfiction, and then I started writing biblical fiction, because I felt like when I wrote Abinadi, Alma, and Alma the Younger, and Ammon, I thought, how many A names are there? How many ancient prophets? I said, I mean, I could write about Aaron, but I felt like, obviously to me, because I had been so deep in the research, I kept them straight, but I felt like my readers might not keep them quite as straight as I was. So I wanted to change from the Book of Mormon, but still write scripture fiction. So in the Christian market, there is a lot of scripture fiction on women in the Bible. And I had read some of it, and it just wasn't like, having this scholarship father, I can just ping off questions. I felt like there's a lot of things missing that could be there. So that's why I chose to do that. But you have to remind me of your original question.
So how did you segue into like romance and
Okay, yeah.
historical fiction?
So I had been writing in this genre, and then I had a group of really close friends, Josie Kilpack,
Yes.
Julie Wright, and Net Lyon. We were all, very involved with things like conferences together, and we would do writing retreats together. And we had always said it would be so fun to write something together. We didn't know what. And so it came up that we would, because they were mostly writing contemporary, like Julie Wright and Josie, they're writing contemporary, and Annette Lane was doing both. And I had just at the point been published in historical, but I was fine to try contemporary. So we came up with the idea of the Newport Ladies Book Club. And it ended up being 9 books that we wrote together. And this book club, and they all go through all these challenges together. And it's just really a sisterhood that they grow out of this book club. So then what happened is my first book in that series was coming out in 2012. And this is when indie publishing was really starting to grab a hold. Yes. We had the big recession and economic crash, especially with publishing, and then Kindle came and Amazon came. And so I had a lot of friends starting to indie publish books that they had never been able to sell for years and years. And so I just thought maybe I should indie publish something, because when my book, it was called Athena, the book club book, was coming out, you look at Amazon, you see historical novels and all of a sudden Athena. So someone reads it and likes it, there's nothing else for them to buy from me, unless they want to go to the other side of what I write. Mm-hmm. So that's why I was just even considering that. I thought, I could just self-publish something, because I could write it in a couple months and then put it out a couple months later. So it could come out the same time as my Athena book, and I'll have more books available on Amazon. And the reason I even was thinking about this, I had other friends kind of doing this as well. And so in my critique group, Annette Lyon and Sarah Eden, they were excited about that idea. So we decided to kind of form this anthology series, because you just get kind of tired of telling readers, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. It's about me. Look at my new, yay. And so I thought, well, if we do anthology, then we have Annette Lyons and Sarah Edens. We have their readership coming to read it. And then we decided to do stories in one anthology and create a theme. We all write to the same theme. And the stories are only 50-page stories, but we put them together so it makes a full book. And so that started the Timeless Romance anthologies. And that really started me writing my first romance ever. I hadn't really read romance for a long time until I was in this critique group, because then I was reading my critique group members' romances. And so I thought, I gotta, understand how to create this romantic tension and, have that be the paw arc instead of, we're fighting the Philistines, next week. And so it was a learning. And even though I had kind of romance in my other books, it wasn't like the main plot, or wasn't the main, tension in the book. So it just started little by little. And then after a couple years of doing anthologies, I decided to write my own. It's just a contemporary small town romance series. And so I did that. But now I'm back to writing. I don't know. I haven't done a full romance novel for at least a year. And I'm mostly back in historical. Historical is like my happy place.
That's your sweet spot.
Yeah, it really is.
And I love, though, that you allowed yourself to foray into that. And again, I see that dynamic of involving other people. And I think you were innately genius about that, because with that connection with the other women, you get their expertise and their perspectives. And then, like you said, readership and things like that. So those that are listening can see the benefit of connecting with people, and that their skill level was a little bit above yours in different areas. And that's a great way to form a critique group. And you look at those things. I mean, in those stories, you guys covered some really intense problems. They were very forward thinking. They were very, I think prescription drug addiction was one of the issues that one of the women had, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it wasn't just your cute little boy meets girl on happy. So I think that's amazing that you were able to do that through so many books, and then be able to switch gears again to happy, light romances. So this is amazing. Let's segue to one more thing. Now that you're back around here, you have your most recent book out. It's The Slow March of Light. And before that, you had The Paper Daughters of China, which was incredible. These are they're based on true stories. They're incredible. And I think you even went to San Francisco and saw for The Paper Daughters of Chinatown where they were keeping the women. Tell us what that is like for you, researching these emotionally charged true stories, making sure getting that right, getting those things correct, but also these are hard things to read, conveying that in a way that, again, one of your other geniuses, taking these topics and then putting it in layman's terms and helping it to be shared in a way that resonates. What do you do with that? How do you approach that?
Well, I think that's a really good question. So the Paper Daughters of Chinatown, when I agreed to write, I had actually pitched some other books to the publisher, and this is with Shadow Mountain. And they came back with the idea to write a book on Donaldina Cameron, who worked at a mission home that helped with the rescue of the Chinese girls from human trafficking in San Francisco, early 1900s. And so I thought, well, if the community already likes this woman, already is excited, then I'll agree to write it. And I had looked her up and I thought, wow, she did amazing. She basically ended up working until she was retirement, serving these girls and going to court for them, getting their rights back. And I just thought, wow, she's incredible. But of course, I had no idea, because when you talk about human trafficking or the slave trade or the sex trade, especially when you're talking about young kids and girls, it's heartbreaking just to even think about it. And then when I did my research was just these, stories of intense cruelty. But in my book, because I was writing for Shadow Mountain, I knew I didn't want to do, anything harsh or graphic. I wanted the story to be inspirational. But yes, we know what's going on, but because human trafficking still goes on today. So I want it to be like, okay, well, let's use Dolly Cameron as an example, how she fought against it and what can we do in our own lives. So what I found though, is I only had one kid at home at the time because my next oldest, she was on a mission, and then my other two were out of the house. And so in my mind, I thought, oh, I just have, so much time on
All
my
this
hands.
time.
Yeah. So I had literally told my agent, and I had talked about me doing this women's fiction series, next. And so I had said, well, I'll just work on, because for me, I can't work on the same thing all day because you just get burned out and foggy brain. So I said, well, I'll just work on this Paper Daughters book, in the morning, early afternoon. And then, in the later afternoon, after things are settled down with the house, or the evening, I can work on this lighter. And it didn't happen because I was so emotionally drained. And I found that I would have to be done by like 2 or 3 in the afternoon with my Paper Daughters research or writing, whatever I was doing. So by the time I went to bed, I could sleep, because it took like hours for it to just like get out of my system and for me to feel like, oh, I can be Heather again.
Wow.
And the other thing that was hard is I couldn't really talk to someone about it. And I mean, I do have, a lot of little writer groups I'm in, so I can mention some things. But what am I going to say, when I read this really hard scene and I'm, or this experience this cute little girl went through? I mean, I can't just throw an email out to my editor, oh my gosh, I just read this, because it just was so out of context. And so I really had to just keep so many of those emotions just to myself. Mm-hmm. And even times when I had shared things with my husband, he's like, well, maybe you shouldn't be writing this book, or maybe, maybe it's too hard emotionally. But I felt like, I need to finish. It's just,
getting through the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And once again, being able to share this in a way that we, like you said, can be inspired. We can be looking to say, how can I help with this so that we don't replicate this? Yeah. And that was in the early 1900s. I think that is an incredible point to make. And now with your new book, this is based on someone who is a spy. And I mean, the intense never knowing what's happening and what's going to happen. How do you navigate being able to deal with that, the intensity of that, of this other way? It wasn't with the same topic, but now this other way. Mm-hmm. How do you, especially when you're dealing with political things? And I mean, that's another sort of a minefield. You have to kind of be careful about that. How do you navigate political things and that kind of intensity and that genre?
Yeah. So with this newer book, The Slow March of Light, so I started writing that at the very beginning of the pandemic. Of course, I didn't know how bad it was going to be and how much everyone would be shut down. But I was so the man it's about, his name is Bob Inama. And we were supposed to meet in person, and we had scheduled that for like middle March. And of course, we all know what happened in March 2020. And so we ended up meeting first over video call. And one of the challenges was that he had not told his story to his family members except for just recently. And when his family found out, one of his children is the one who contacted Desert Book and said, hey, my dad has this amazing story, and we just barely learned about it. So I knew he had been through a lot of trauma, and he had also not shared it. Mm. And so the hard thing about that is I felt like he's telling me stuff for the first time that he's never shared with his family. So how am I going to write it? but he was so just humble and sweet. And I would send him chapters to look at. I send him a list of questions and I'd say, you don't have to answer these
Mm.
because I didn't want to be the trigger of something that he didn't want to remember.
Yes.
And sometimes he would say, there's some things I wanted to forget or I don't remember, which to me was just saying, this is not something I want to talk about. He's with the US Army. They sent him into East Germany to be an undercover spy, act as like he's an American university student, and he plots targets for the nuclear, Cold War that's going on. And then he sends back the coordinates to his officers. And then he ends up getting arrested by the Soviets and put into prison. And so even the prison scenes, I was just asking him about the prison and he would say things. And I thought, well, how do I write it though? Am I really going to go as deep as he's saying? Because he was beaten every day. And then how is he going to feel when he reads it? So those were like the hard things. And so when I finally finished the manuscript, I sent it to beta readers that had served in West Germany in the Army as well, but they were a little bit later in the 70s. Bob was in the early 60s when the Berlin Wall went up. And so they read it and gave me feedback. And then I finally sent it to Bob. I printed it off, I mailed it, and he only gave me one correction back.
Wow.
He said, well, you put the wrong initial for my father, but it just shows how humble he was. And his wife had read it. And I think one of his daughters read it too in advance. And Bob had felt like I had captured his personality and his character.
What a gift. Heather, that is such, I would say, the greatest compliment to a writer that is doing that kind of story, that is the only correction that he felt that you captured it, for you to not even be there, and yet to do it in a way that could be digested with other people, right? That they could take that and really experience it in a way that was doable. That is incredible. And I can't even imagine, again, what both of you went through, and you having gone through that paper daughter's experience, being able to understand how he must have felt not being able to share pieces, and what a sacred space that you two must have shared with that, of both understanding what that story meant and the telling of it meant. And I think that is a huge stewardship of an author, is not just getting in and like getting the deadlines done and getting it out there, but the treatment of the whole process, especially when you're involving another person in their story. That is just beautiful, the way that you approach that. That leads me to how have you, as we're wrapping this up, how has your faith helped you to be able to deal with this writing journey, those intense moments, those nuances that you wouldn't know yourself, the ups and downs, the highs and lows, the learning and the weaknesses and the strengths and all the things? How has your faith helped you move forward in this writing journey?
I think honestly, my faith and, praying a lot has helped me make the decisions one day at a time, because I think our time really is sacred. Like you, I'm a mom, and, there's a lot of things to juggle, and you want to be there for the most important people in your life when they really need you. And so I do pray about my writing time. I don't know if that sounds hokey or not.
I do too. No, I think most people would agree.
I feel like, okay, I'm going to write for a few hours or whatever, the afternoon or the morning. And I want this writing to count. I want it to be where I'm doing my very best in this moment, because at 12 o'clock, I have to go help in my daughter's, class, and probably won't get back to the computer in for another 24 hours. And so that's always been a prayer in my heart many, many times. Also, just to have the Spirit with me so that I can approach the story respectfully, especially when I'm taking these true stories, whether it's biblical or someone that's still living, and and also be open-minded to correction or revision, and not feel offended or too protective, or like, my writing is so perfect or whatever, because it's not. And I know that's not at all, but I do definitely use my faith and prayers so that every writing session or every writing opportunity I have is going to be well used. Because I think a lot of us, we always feel like we're being pulled different directions all the time. And so even though writing is my job, it is my career, I still have a million other things I love to do and that are important to do.
That's so fantastic. And I know I've talked with you. Our daughters do volleyball, and I've asked you volleyball questions, and you're over there typing at a volleyball match. I just love it. I just think it's fantastic that you have been able to weave in the writing and the mom thing and all the things, just like those that are listening are trying to do as well, and being able to validate each of those pieces and prayerfully approach that. One last question on this, as far as this realm. How has that affected you working with a national agent? Because you have an agent. Is she back in New York? I think it is. Is that right?
Yes.
Has that ever come into play, or has that ever been a thing where you've had some experiences with that, of this intersection of faith, creativity, and that professional skill?
My current agent, she has one daughter, and her daughter's a little bit younger than mine. But every time we talk or email, like, we always talk about our families. And she also is Christian. And I've had other agents that, are Jewish. And so it's really cute because they want to talk about family and religion, which is surprising to me because, we're different religions. I haven't ever felt, put down or anything. I just have always felt really welcome. And I think in general, most people are very welcome and loving, and once you get to know them.
I love that. And I have no doubt that your experience with so much scriptural history can help you understand that Jewish faith and have commonality. And there is so much in common between religions, that especially with faith and family, and that there's just that, those cornerstones. So I think that is fantastic. As we've been talking today, the different people listening, they're all at different stages of their writing, want to write, they are writing, they're down in the dumps, they're in the highs, and they're in the throes. Is there any bit of advice, the one last thing that maybe you haven't been able to share that hasn't come up? Is there one last bit of advice that you would want to leave with everyone today?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for me, the big thing is just perseverance and set goals. Always have a backup plan so you don't have to eat too much ice cream after you get a rejection. But I always say, okay, this book, I love this book to be published here. If not, then I have, backup plans for it.
That's so fantastic. And this has been so inspiring to me today, because I think life can get busy, and carpool and work and all of those things. And you can just shove those little dreams that are just percolating inside and shove them to the side and think, well, that's just a fluffy thing. But this is we feel called to do these things, and the Lord can use us if we'll seek what it is He wants us to do with it, and then give us the know-how of how we can make that happen. And you have shared beautifully today how to do that. Heather, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much. It's so fun to talk to you, just in general.
I feel the same way. I almost feel like the after party, like we could go for another hour. Oh,
right.
So if people want to get a hold of you, which I know they're going to want to, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Oh, I mean, social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I do have a website, it's hbmoore.com, and you can contact me through email there.
And so many resources there, so much good stuff. Do check that out. It is just fantastic. As always, such a joy and a treat, and we wish you every good thing. Thank you so much, everybody, today. We appreciate you joining us. We would love it if you love this to rate, review, and subscribe. And also check out our other interviews with other speakers and authors and media personalities that are going to help you move forward in your journey and in your ability to find the intersection of faith, creativity, and professional skill.